On a serene day in the month of June, and in the year 2018, the Wild Boars Football Club's young players began their routine training, blissfully unaware of the adventure that awaited. A detour to the mysterious Tam Luang caves turned their lives into a gripping tale of courage, camaraderie, and resilience. What started as innocent exploration quickly spiraled into a life-or-death struggle as heavy rains transformed the cave into a watery labyrinth. With their bicycles left behind and hope flickering, the world rallied to rescue these boys. On June 23, 2018, the Wild Boars Football Club boys gathered for their usual training session. These boys, aged 11 to 16, trained hard under the guidance of their head coach and assistant coach. It was just another regular day on the field. After training wrapped up, the head coach waved goodbye to the team and went off to prepare for the older squad's upcoming game. He casually placed his phone aside, graciously unaware of the storm brewing, both literally and figuratively. Hours later, the coach grabbed his phone and froze. His screen was flooded with missed calls from frantic parents, not just one or two, but dozens. The boys hadn't returned home, and the clock was ticking. Alarmed, the coach began dialing each player one by one. Every call went unanswered, until finally, 13-year-old Sangpol picked up. Safe and sound at home, Sangpol explained he had been picked up earlier by his mother. However, he dropped a bombshell. The rest of the team, along with the assistant coach, had biked to the nearby Tam Luang caves to explore. That's when the real worry set in. Without wasting time, the coach raced to the caves. What he found there made his heart sink. At the entrance, the boys' bicycles were parked neatly, but there was no sign of the team. To make things worse, a fast-moving stream of water now rushed through the entrance. Heavy rain had begun while the boys were inside, creating a dangerous flood. If they were still alive, they were trapped deep within. Thai police soon arrived, finding backpacks and other belongings left by the boys, but the cave itself was impassable. The rising water made further exploration impossible. The local authorities quickly called for help, bringing in the Thai Navy SEALs to the Chiang Rai region. A crisis management team was assembled to handle the situation. As if fate decided to lend a hand, a British man named Vernon Unsworth approached the officials. Unsworth wasn't just any random guy. He was a seasoned caver who had spent years mapping and exploring the Tam Luang cave system. Unsworth knew this cave like the back of his hand. Tam Luang, the fourth longest cave in Thailand, stretched over 10 kilometers deep. About a kilometer in, the cave split into two paths at a T-section. If the boys were alive, they'd most likely be in a higher, safer area deeper inside. Unsworth's knowledge was a game changer. Thanks to him, the Thai authorities were able to connect with the British Cave Rescue Council. This led to two elite cave divers, John Valanthan and Rick Stanton, flying in to join the mission. The race to find the boys had officially begun. John and Rick had been diving partners for years. Their trust in each other was as solid as the tanks on their backs. These two weren't just your average hobbyists. They had seen it all, from daring rescues to grim recovery missions. Now their expertise was being called upon to tackle one of the most talked about incidents in the world. News reports everywhere buzzed about the missing boys and their coach, while worried parents and authorities grew more desperate by the second. As specialists from all over the globe joined the operation, the mood turned increasingly somber. If the boys were alive, the ticking clock wasn't on their side. They had only planned for a short trip into the cave, meaning they likely had little to no food. Meanwhile, relentless rainfall worsened the already dangerous situation. Water levels surged higher, making it even tougher for the Thai Navy SEALs to navigate through the cave system. When John and Rick, two civilians, arrived on the scene, some eyebrows were raised. These older men didn't exactly fit the image of elite rescuers. Doubt lingered in the air. After all, the SEALs were highly trained military professionals. But this wasn't a battlefield. It was a maze of tight passages, murky water, and unstable terrain. Cave diving required a unique set of skills that John and Rick had spent years perfecting. John, an IT consultant by trade, and Rick, a retired firefighter, were not athletes or soldiers, but they were cave diving experts. A title earned through countless hours in some of the world's most challenging underwater systems. Their unassuming appearances belied their ability to navigate places most people wouldn't dream of entering. Tam Luang Cave was no ordinary challenge. It was a labyrinth of twists and turns, with sections that required swimming, crawling, climbing, and even walking. Visibility inside was practically non-existent. In many parts of the cave, you couldn't even see your hand in front of your face. The water was so murky that the divers had to rely on touch, groping along walls and rocks to find their way. At times, the current was so strong that swimming was impossible. To make progress, John and Rick resorted to dragging themselves along the sandy floor, pulling forward inch by inch. Despite these extreme conditions, the duo methodically worked their way deeper into the cave. Their first mission was to place guidelines, lifelines, really, that would help other divers follow the route safely. Swimming against the current was exhausting, but they were relentless. Using their hands to grip the cave floor, they painstakingly secured these ropes in place. Each line laid down brought a small but significant step toward reaching the boys. As the lines were secured, other divers could follow the path more easily, pulling themselves along rather than battling the powerful current. Even so, the journey remained grueling. Their destination was a section of the cave known as Pattaya Beach. Unlike its tropical namesake, this beach was a chamber located high enough to offer some protection from rising waters. If the boys were alive, this was the most likely place they would be found. The work wasn't just physically draining, it was mentally taxing too. With zero visibility and the constant threat of getting lost or stuck, every move required intense focus. John and Rick, however, were calm and composed. They knew this was their element. For them, it wasn't just about finding the boys, it was about ensuring that the route was safe enough for others to follow. The combination of swimming, climbing, and navigating the maze-like cave demanded every ounce of their expertise, but step by step, and dive by dive, they pressed on. With each guideline placed, the rescue team grew closer to their goal. Pattaya Beach wasn't just a potential refuge for the boys, it was also a critical milestone for the divers. Reaching it could mean the difference between life and death for the young team trapped inside. As they worked, the tension was almost tangible, but so was their determination. Every pull forward, every knot tied, and every guideline secured was a testament to their skill and commitment. While doubts had initially clouded their arrival, John and Rick were proving that experience, not appearances, was what mattered most in this extraordinary mission. The search for the missing Wild Boars football team continued with urgency as the rain poured relentlessly. John and Rick, two skilled divers, had to halt their exploration temporarily. The downpour wasn't just a nuisance. It was a force dictating the fate of those trapped inside. Despite the risky conditions, giving up wasn't an option. The Thai Navy SEALs worked tirelessly, and volunteers poured in from all directions. Among them was Saman Kunan, a former Navy SEAL, and a highly experienced diver who joined the effort with unwavering determination. Inside the cave, Chamber 3 became a lifeline. This large cavern offered enough dry space to serve as a hub for storing equipment, air tanks, and stationing divers. It was a bustling base camp amid an otherwise grim situation. Meanwhile, outside, teams worked desperately to manage the water levels. Efforts included diverting nearby rivers, searching for alternative cave entrances, and deploying powerful pumps to drain the flooding. It was a race against time, and hope was dwindling. The boys and their coach had now been missing for 72 hours. Even with the bleak circumstances, the local search team stayed hopeful, and their spirit inspired others. As the rain subsided slightly, the British divers, John and Rick, geared up again. This time, their dive was more ambitious, pushing further into the cave with a goal of reaching Pattaya Beach, the highest point within the cave system. The journey was grueling. The murky water and narrow passages made every moment tense. After hours of navigating the treacherous conditions, they finally arrived at Pattaya Beach. But their hearts sank. There was no sign of the boys. Faced with this disappointment, the divers had a choice: turn back or push beyond their limit. Normally, divers use a third of their air supply to go in, a third to return, and keep the last third as a safety reserve. John and Rick had already gone beyond this rule, but they weren't ready to quit. With grit and determination, they pressed on, laying guide wires as they moved deeper into the cave. They went more than double the planned distance, leaving Pattaya Beach far behind. Then something incredible happened. As they surfaced in another part of the cave, a faint light caught their eyes. It wasn't a reflection or a trick of the water. It was real, and with the light came voices. The divers froze for a moment, stunned. Could it be? As John swam closer, he turned on his camera to document what was happening. When they reached the source of the light, they found the boys and their coach alive. All 13 of them were there, huddled together, exhausted but breathing. Relief washed over everyone like a wave. The boys were weak but conscious, and their gratitude was overwhelming. They kept thanking John and Rick repeatedly, their voices trembling with emotion. The divers reassured them, telling them help was on the way. The next morning, 3 courageous Thai Navy SEALs navigated the flooded, twisting tunnels to join the trapped boys. Their presence brought comfort, but the reality remained grim. While the world cheered at the discovery of the boys, the rescue team knew this was only the start of a very tough job. Finding them had been the simpler part. Now came the nearly impossible task of bringing them safely out of the cave. At the rescue site, every effort was focused on pumping water out of the cave as quickly as possible. Machines roared day and night, draining water like it was a never-ending ocean. Even billionaire Elon Musk joined in, designing a kid-sized submarine that looked like it came straight out of a sci-fi movie. Unfortunately, the rescue team found it impractical for the cave's narrow and winding tunnels, leading Musk to vent his frustration online. It was clear that there wasn't going to be a quick or easy solution. Several options were considered, each more challenging than the last. One plan was to teach the boys how to dive. Instructors would train them on short dives within the cave until they were ready for the dangerous journey out. Another idea was to drill a new shaft into the cave and use an emergency elevator, similar to how miners were rescued in Chile in 2010. The final option was to leave the boys where they were, keeping them supplied with food until the monsoon rain stopped and the water levels receded. On the surface, these plans sound promising, but every single one came with huge risks. Teaching the boys to dive might have worked in ideal conditions, but this cave was no swimming pool. The boys were exhausted from being trapped for days without proper sleep or food, and some didn't even know how to swim. The path out of the cave was long, dark, and treacherous, with tight spaces that could trigger panic. One wrong move or a moment of fear could lead to disaster. Drilling a rescue shaft wasn't much better. In Chile, it had taken 7 weeks to reach the trapped miners, and this situation was even more complex. The boys were almost 1 kilometer underground, with solid rock separating them from the surface. Finding their exact location and lining up a borehole with their chamber was a near impossible task. And even if the shaft was drilled successfully, it wasn't clear how to extract the boys safely. Waiting for the rains to stop seemed like the least risky plan, but it wasn't realistic either. The rainy season wouldn't end until October, months away. Meanwhile, the oxygen levels in the boys' chamber were already dropping to dangerously low levels. The longer they stayed trapped, the harder it would be for them to survive. Despite the overwhelming challenges, the rescue team refused to give up. Each idea was analyzed, debated, and tested, with experts from around the world pitching in. The situation was tense, the stakes were high, and every passing moment felt like a race against time. The boys' lives depended on finding a solution, no matter how difficult or unlikely it seemed. As the rescue unfolded, the world watched with bated breath. It was a story of hope, courage, and determination in the face of impossible odds. The rescuers worked tirelessly, battling water, rock, and time itself. Each pump, plan, and decision brought them closer to an outcome that no one could yet predict. For now, the boys remained trapped, but their rescuers weren't giving up. They were determined to bring them home. It was still just the start of the rainy season, a time when downpours stretch all the way to November. If nothing changed, the boys and their coach could be stuck in the cave for over 4 long months. But this wasn't a quiet camping trip. Rising rainwater could easily flood their safe space, turning it into a deadly trap. The rescuers were scrambling for ideas, but every plan seemed to hit a dead end. And then, the mood grew even darker with devastating news. A retired Navy SEAL, Saman Kunan, had tragically died during the rescue efforts. Saman was young, strong, and experienced. He had volunteered to help, knowing the risks, but lost his life due to a lack of oxygen during a dive. His diving partner found him unconscious, but it was too late to save him. Saman's death wasn't just heartbreaking, it was a harsh reminder of how life-threatening the entire operation was. If a trained SEAL couldn't make it, what chance did the boys have? Out of desperation, an idea that sounded downright crazy was tossed onto the table. What if the boys were sedated and brought out of the cave while unconscious? It sounded more like a movie plot than a real plan, but there were no better options left. Rick Stanton, one of the lead divers, contacted Dr. Richard Harris, an anesthesiologist from Australia, who also happened to be an experienced cave diver. At first, Dr. Harris was completely against the idea. Seating the boys and navigating the treacherous cave system seemed almost suicidal. But as he arrived in Thailand and evaluated the situation, he realized there wasn't another way to save them. It was either this plan or nothing. A team of the world's best cave divers was quickly assembled to execute this high-risk rescue. The plan was intricate and nerve-wracking. Each boy would wear a wetsuit and be given 2 sedative shots to ensure they stayed fully unconscious throughout the journey. A specially designed diving mask covering their entire face would provide provide positive air pressure. This design ensured that even if a small gap allowed water in, the mask would keep the boys breathing. To prevent any accidental movements, their hands were tied behind their backs. Oxygen tanks were placed on their chests, ensuring their heads stayed upright to avoid blocking their airways. The boys were tethered to their rescuers so they wouldn't drift away in the dark, fast-moving waters. From the moment they left the safety of the chamber, their lives depended entirely on the divers. A single mistake, like the mask shifting even slightly, could lead to drowning. The stakes couldn't have been higher, and the rescuers knew it. For parts of the cave that could be crossed on foot, the boys were carefully placed on stretchers and carried to the next diving section. This wasn't a smooth walk either. It involved navigating slippery rocks and tight spaces while ensuring the boys remained stable. The sedative didn't last for the entire journey, so divers had to administer additional doses mid-rescue using pre-prepared syringes. It was a race against time and danger, every step fraught with tension. The operation was like threading a needle underwater blindfolded while juggling flaming torches. One wrong move, one equipment failure, and it could all go horribly wrong. But despite the enormous risks, the team pressed on, knowing that each boy they saved was a miracle in the making. With every meter they swam or crawled, they carried not just the boys, but the hope of their families, their country, and the world. This wasn't just a rescue mission. It was a fight against nature itself. As the water swirled and the cave walls loomed, the rescuers held on tightly, determined to succeed against all odds. Each boy's life was in their hands, and they weren't letting go. The divers were on edge the entire time. Every move they made, every second spent underwater, had everyone holding their breath. But when the first two boys reached Chamber 3 safely, a sense of hope started to creep in. Could this crazy plan actually work? It seemed like it might. The water had been drained enough for the divers to breathe easily, and the Navy SEALs, along with volunteers, moved the boys on stretchers through the rough, rocky parts of the cave. By the time the news reported, 4 boys had already been rescued. The world was watching closely as helicopters and ambulances rushed to the scene. The next day, another 4 boys were pulled from the cave. On the third and final day, the plan was set to save the last 4 boys and their assistant coach. Everything was looking good, and the procedure was almost routine by now. But of course, just when it seemed like everything was going smoothly, something went wrong. The last boy was the smallest of the group, and the positive pressure mask didn't fit his tiny face. No matter how tight the divers pressed it against him, it wouldn't form a proper seal. Panic set in as they realized they had to try another mask, one they had hoped they wouldn't need. This new mask was a small children's mask, more for casual diving than a life-or-death rescue. It barely fit and kept slipping off. The divers scrambled to secure it as best as they could, hoping against hope that it would hold. It was a tense moment for everyone involved, but somehow they made it work. The last boy was safely transported, and the operation continued. By the end of the third day, every boy and the coach were out. The cheers and relief from everyone on the rescue team and around the world were overwhelming. The mission was a success, even bigger than the divers had imagined, but it didn't come without a cost. One of the Thai Navy SEALs, Beirut Pakbara, contracted a serious blood infection during the rescue. Despite his best efforts, the infection wore him down over time. Just 1 year after the operation, he sadly passed away. His death was a painful reminder of the dangers the rescuers faced. 2 Thai Navy SEALs had lost their lives to bring the football team to safety. They had sacrificed everything to ensure the boys made it out. Despite the risk and the tragedy, the operation was a huge success. The collaboration between the British divers and the Thai Navy SEALs was flawless. What started as a skeptical partnership turned into a well-oiled machine that worked efficiently and strategically. The entire world had watched in awe as these teams saved the lives of 12 boys and their coach, an achievement that went down in history. The operation was over, but the boys and their coach became heroes in their own right. They were finally free from the cave, and the world celebrated their survival. The rescuers didn't feel like heroes, though. One of the divers explained that if anyone had the skills to help, they would have done the same thing for anyone else's child. They were just in the right place at the right time, with the right skills to make it happen. The story was shared around the world, and soon, the boys, known as the Wild Boars soccer team, were making their rounds on TV shows. They were treated like celebrities, praised for their resilience and strength. The rescue had brought them into the spotlight, but it was the efforts of the rescuers that made it possible. Though the mission was a huge success, there were still things that weren't perfect. The story of the rescue, one that had touched hearts worldwide, was one the narrator had wanted to tell for a long time. It was an incredible, emotional journey that many would never forget. Yet the loss of the two brave SEALs remained a bitter note in an otherwise heartwarming tale. But in the end, the operation was a victory, a reminder of the incredible things people can accomplish when they work together. The boys were free, the coach was safe, and the rescuers had done their job, saving lives, no matter the cost. The world watched, cheered, and was forever grateful for the bravery and determination of the Thai Navy SEALs and the British divers.